Hi, this is the third of the three videos that I'm making for your essay number 5. In this video, we're going to talk about sources. This, again, is not a research paper. It's what the English department calls a documented essay. It's an essay using sources, but you don't actually have to do the research. I'm giving you the sources. It's just sort of an introduction to how to do academic research. And next semester in English 132 or English 135, um, those are the courses that you might take next semester after English 131. In those classes, you'll learn in a lot more detail about how to do an academic research paper. So this is just to kind of get you used to some of the issues. I had you read in your Starkey book the chapter about researching for your topic. The first thing they talk to you about in the first section, they call it the CARS checklist, the CARS checklist. C, credibility; A, accuracy; R, reasonableness; S, support. Right? When you're looking at any sources and trying to decide whether you should use them or not, you need to think about credibility. Is this a source that your reader is going to respect? Because if not, you probably shouldn't use it. Does the source look like the information is accurate? Does it seem reasonable? Does it seem angry and emotional? Does it seem fair and even-handed, etc.? And finally, support. Is there evidence that that what they're saying is true? Do they have a work cited or bibliography, and do they cite sources and so forth? All right. So you need to think about that with any of the sources that you find when you're doing research. But in your case, you won't have to, because I'm providing you with five sources. The rest of the chapter is divided into 3 sections. You can see on page 87, they talk about library databases. Page 93, they talk about books. And on page 95, they start talking about internet sources. So when you're doing a research paper, they talk about the three-legged stool of research. Right? You know about a three-legged stool. Why do you want 3 legs on a stool? Because it's stable, right? If you only have 2 legs, it can tip over, right? So you need at least 3 legs for it to be stable. So that's the metaphor. For a research paper, of course, you'd probably want to use internet sources because there's so much out there. You also should use books, see if there's anything on your topic published in books. Sometimes students say, well, everything is online, so I don't need to look in books, but that's not true. If you're a person who writes books, if you're an expert who's taking a year or 2 of your life to write books, you're going to publish it through a publisher who will sell it. You're not going to put it online for free. So, if an expert were to write a book and someone tried to put it online, it would be taken down and they could get in trouble. In other words, most of the very best information is kept off of the internet. You can find information on topics on the internet, but you can't always find the best information. So you want to use internet sources, and you want to use books, and then the third source, the third kind of source, or the third leg of the three-legged stool, is what this book calls library databases. Well, do you know what a database is? a database, it's a you know computer age term. Um, Data is information, and base. It's just a collection of information, um, but it's a collection of it's information that was collected by a person or group for a specific purpose. So it's information that's on a certain topic collected for a certain purpose. Um, so an easy example that you're familiar with would be in a library. Their catalog is a database. All the information, or all the titles of all the books that they have been entered into a database electronically, and that way you can search and find out what books they have and where they are. Another kind of database might be uh, your your doctor would have um, all kinds of information, records about you and all the other patients in their caseload, and that would all be organized and searchable so that any information could be brought up. But you wouldn't find your dog's vaccination records in your doctor's um, database. It would be in the veterinarian's database, and um, your driver's license would be in the Secretary of State's database, and so forth. So databases are these specific collections of information, and the internet, for example, think of the internet. That's not a database, because that's not a collection put together by a person or a group of people. That's just, it's more like a bulletin board. Anybody can post anything on it. So databases are these controlled collections of information that you can access, and they're very valuable because people often, they're making a database, they're gathering the best quality data on that subject, the best quality information. And when they talk about a library database, as they do on page 87, what they mean are the databases that give you access to articles in newspapers and magazines, right? What they call periodicals. They're called periodicals because they come out periodically. When a book gets published, it gets published on a certain day and it's just out there. But periodicals, like the newspaper, come out periodically, every day or every week. A magazine maybe comes out every month or every week or twice a month or something like that. So newspapers, magazines, see that? Magazines, make America great again. That's not what it stands for. All right. And newspapers, magazines, and what they call academic journals. An academic journal is it's kind of magazine, really. It's a periodical that comes out 4, 6 times a year or something like that. And they have articles written by experts for experts, right? So these are academic journals, or sometimes called professional journals. These here are called popular magazines or popular periodicals, because they're written, popular in this case doesn't mean super liked by everybody, but it means having to do with the people, just sort of the general people. These are written for ordinary people. These are written for experts and by experts. Um, so how do you find an article in a magazine? Well, one way people read magazines is they get a subscription to it, and when it comes to their house, they look through it and they see what's published this month, or same thing with the newspaper. But when you're doing research, you're going to go into past periodicals and look for articles on certain topics. And how do you do that? You don't just start looking through the magazines and newspapers. There has to be some way to search for that. And that's what the library databases are for, and that's what they do. Let me show you how to do this. Don't look at my password. So here's my iPad. Is that going to work? Let's see. Sort of. This is the library's homepage. All right. Not working as well as I had thought. But on the library's homepage, just how do you get here? Somehow the college seems to have hidden the link to the library's homepage. I can't find it easily on the on the school's website. So just what I do is I just type in HFC library and it comes up. So here's the home page, and you can see the what we call the catalog, right? The classic catalog. This is for searching for books. You can search for books by keyword, by title, by author, or by subject. But what we want is the second thing here, research databases. Library has books, but it also has periodicals, which are searched by the research databases. It has government documents. It has something called the Michigan Electronic Library, and this is it's stuff that's beyond what our library holds. All right. So if we go into research databases, we'll see that there's a list of databases that they have. Each one of these has information on a different subject, right? What if I can make this darker? Aha, that's a little better, huh? Yeah, sort of. All right. Wrong thing. Research databases, right? You can see all the research databases here. Now, if I try to go into the research databases, into any one of them, let's say I'm going to go into, if you look at the instructions that I gave you on the assignment sheet, I tell you that you can access these articles from the college library's webpage. Click on Research Databases, then click on InfoTrack Gale. See that? InfoTrack Gale. And that's where it asks you for your library card. If you don't have one, oops, you're going to have to get one, as I warned you before. Mine is already entered in. I just have to give it my my thumbprint there. So you got to have a library card because they want you to enter your barcode number. And then going into InfoTrack Gale, you can see that's a database made up of a bunch of other databases. So if you think of a database as a big box of information, InfoTrack Gale is like a ginormous box. You open that box up, and there's a bunch of separate boxes inside of it, right? So, all right. So, what we want to do is again, following the instructions on the assignment sheet. It says, then click on the Select All box. You can see Select All right here in the upper left-hand corner of the blue. Right? Select All. And then put the title of the article in quotation marks. What are we going to do here? Up here in the query box, the search box, we put the title of whatever article you're looking for in quotation marks. Let's do the second one. It says, more Americans have died in car crashes since 2000 than in both world wars. Wow, that's a shocking statistic. That's a long title, but we're going to put it in quotation marks, double quotes. More Americans have died in car crashes. More Americans have died in car crashes since 2000 than in both world wars. Why did I put it in quotation marks? I put the title of the article in quotation marks. When you search for something, this is true in Google and for lots of things that have search boxes. If you put something, a string of words between quotation marks, it will look for that exact whole string of characters, and you can really pinpoint something. Like, for example, when somebody plagiarizes their paper, I do a Google search on a sentence, maybe put it in quotation marks, and bing, up it comes, right? So let's see what happens here. If I typed it correctly, we should probably get the article. Is it searching? Yes, it's searching. Technical difficulties. This happens on this happens sometimes on the internet, of course, but it seems to happen more often on our library's website, or I should maybe say the company Gale Research that that supplies our databases. Try it again. It's probably going to have technical difficulties again. Well, that's not great, but I can describe to you what happens when the article comes up. You'll see a list of articles. If there's more than one article that has a similar title, that probably won't happen. But you'll see the title of the article there, and you click on the article, and it'll open up the full text of the article for you there. So again, you didn't have to research. You just had to, I'm giving you the driving directions to steer you directly to the 5 articles here. 6 articles, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I added some this semester. I had 4 before and I added 2 more. So once you access each of these articles, smart thing to do would be to either print them out, as I did. I printed them out because when I'm grading your papers, I don't want to have to do a lot of searches. I want to have the hard copy. It's easier for grading to have the hard copy. You might just want to have the electronic copy, and the library's homepage gives you the option of emailing the document to yourself, printing it out, downloading it to your computer, various different ways to acquire it like that. Okay. So then you want to read those articles. and they're from a variety of different sources, right? The first one is from the New York Times, the second one from the Washington Post, third one, Washington Post again, fourth one, Science News, fifth one, New York Times again, and the sixth one, The Economist. So Science News and The Economist are both magazines. The Economist is a very well-respected news magazine from Great Britain. Science News, reasonably well-respected periodical. And then, of course, Washington Post and New York Times are highly credible sources. So what you'll find in these, some of them are news articles, and they'll report something about, like this story about more Americans have died in car crashes than in both world wars. It'll report who did that study, and then they'll have experts talking about what it means and so forth. Each one of these articles has information in it that is potentially usable in your paper. As I said in the last video, this paper is not supposed to be your report of what these articles say. That's not what it's supposed to be. The paper is, as the first paragraph says, your proposal of what should be done to address the problem of distracted driving. In the course of making your argument, you will quote from or use information from 2 or 3 of these articles, right? 2 or 3 quotes or paraphrases or something like that that you pull from these articles. So you're getting a little bit of practice of integrating, taking information from sources and integrating it into your paper, but it's not really a true research paper. The paper should be dominated by your proposal for what should be done about distracted driving. Okay. Great. What kinds of things do you need to cite? Well, let me get my magic blue board here. What to cite? Well, you need to cite sources whenever you use them, of course. Any quotes that you use, of course. And by quotes, we mean language that's used verbatim, word for word. Any string of words that's identical to how it appears in a source, that needs to be put in quotation marks, and the source should be named, right? But even if you take information and put it in your own words, we talked about that when we did the paper on plagiarism. Even if you put it in your own words, you're still taking somebody else's ideas. And you got to cite people's ideas unless those ideas that the person is expressing are what we call common knowledge. This all sounds familiar to you from the plagiarism discussion. By the way, there have been 3 students this semester who got in trouble for plagiarizing. At least 3 students have plagiarized, I can tell you that. 2 of them have failed the class for plagiarism, and a third did not, just failed the paper, but that's because there were circumstances in that one case that caused the person not to fail the whole class. But be careful. Don't plagiarize. Quotes, paraphrases, and the third way that a source can be used is a summary. A summary is like a paraphrase, but it's taking something detailed and just reporting um, the most general ideas from it, right? Um, Taking something long and reporting just the gist of it, just the key ideas. All right. So you need to cite any one of those, right? If you quote or paraphrase, you need to cite your source. And the way that you cite your source, um, ideally, is with what they call a signal phrase, right? A signal phrase, which would be like, you know, according to Susan Smith, with that phrase, you're signaling to the reader that you're going to quote from somebody or borrow somebody's ideas. And if it is a quote, of course, you put it in quotation marks. And then at the end, you would put the page number in parentheses, right? That's a signal phrase. Here's our signal phrase. According to Susan Smith. That's good. All the books on research will encourage you to use signal phrases. The other way you can cite a source is with what they call a parenthetical reference. My handwriting's getting sloppy down here. Parenthetical reference. That means in parentheses, right? And that would be done like this. Instead of mentioning who the author is, you just have at the end of the sentence, whether it's a quote or a paraphrase or whatever, the author's name and the page number, right? A parenthetical reference. That's perfectly acceptable, although this is better because this indicates where the borrowed material begins and where it ends, right? It kind of surrounds it from the beginning of the sentence to the end of the sentence. It kind of captures it. This one, the reader is reading along, and then if there's no quote, if it's just a paraphrase, they encounter a reference, right? A citation that can be surprising. They didn't know that they were reading something by somebody else. And also, let me show you this. If you have a whole paragraph like this, and then you had a reference at the end, a citation, you wouldn't know whether the citation, the borrowed information was just this one last sentence, or just part of this last sentence, or the last two sentences, or the whole paragraph. You wouldn't really know where the information began. If you have a signal phrase, something like Susan Smith claims, yada, yada, yada. Okay, now you've kind of surrounded the borrowed material again. You show that it comes after this and before this. So it's this material right here. And that's more precise and more helpful for the reader. All right? So use citations, cite your sources and use signal phrases when you can. One other thing to discuss here. We talked a little bit about how to cite and what to cite. Another question is why to cite. Why do we cite things? Well, you know, the obvious sort of legalistic reason is, well, I better cite so that I don't plagiarize, because if I don't cite my sources, I might be plagiarizing and I might get in trouble. So, yeah, it's true. It's it's a kind of a minimal level honesty to cite your sources. Um, but there are other reasons to cite your sources. And one of them is because other researchers, when you're talking about writing academic essays or books, other researchers want to be able to trace where you got your information from. And you can do this in your own research papers. When you find a source that you want to use, you can look at their bibliography, their works cited, and their sources, see what they used, and find those sources yourself and use them yourself, right? Also, when you use citations, when you cite sources, that gives more power to your claim, right? If you're claiming that, was the example I used in the last video, surgical masks made of such and such material capture 80% of the particles that fly out of your mouth when you cough. Well, you can say that in your paper, and the reader will say, well, how do I know that's true? If in your paper you cite a source and it looks like it's a legitimate scientific study, well, that gives your paper a lot more force. That's not just about avoiding plagiarism. That's about making your argument forceful, right? If you can show to your reader that you're not just making something up, but also that it comes from a source that your reader is likely to expect or respect, that makes your argument, as I said, more forceful, more powerful. So if I tell you Susan Smith said something, that's not going to make much difference to you because you don't know who she is probably. But if I said Susan Smith reports in the New York Times that whatever, you may not know Susan Smith, but you know the New York Times, or the Chicago Tribune, or the Detroit News, or some other widely respected newspaper or magazine. So it helps sometimes to either name what the publication is, if you think that will gain the evidence some credibility, or who the author is. If I said Susan Smith, an economist from Yale University, well, you don't know Susan Smith, but you do know Yale University, and so you can trust that, right? All right. So the Little Seagull Handbook, I had you read a couple of sections in the Little Seagull Handbook that had to do with using sources. First section was called Synthesizing Ideas. By that they mean you read all the information, like in this case I've given you 6 articles and 3 videos. You listen to what I say, you read what the articles say, you think about it yourself. You, in your mind, synthesize things, which means kind of see how things all fit together and kind of blend together and construct your beliefs, right? So there's a section on synthesizing ideas, and then section R4 is about integrating sources into your paper. I have a little section on that on the back side of my assignment sheet as well. I show you 3 different ways to integrate a quote into your paper. One way is better than the other 2, or I guess I should say 2 ways are the second and third models are better than the first one. So read that over for additional advice about how to integrate information from your sources into your paper. And I think that's it, pretty much. Yeah, one last thing, I guess. I've been demonstrating to you that for a parenthetical citation, if you have the author named in a signal phrase, Of course, you don't need to have the author's name at the end, or maybe not of course, but it's true. You only need to have the name one or the other place. And with a lot of sources nowadays, because they're electronic, there isn't any page number, and so there is nothing to leave in parentheses. If you're using a signal phrase, it's just going to end right there, right? If it's a quote, it'll be clear to the reader, which part of this sentence belongs to Susan Smith. If it's not a quote, if it's something you're paraphrasing, it will not be entirely clear, but that's just how the system works, right? You try to make it as clear as you can. I think that's it. So then the papers are due on Friday. I put a Friday 11:59 p.m., 1 minute before Saturday, for you to turn in your papers. And because I've set it up on Moodle, you can submit it right into Moodle. And if you have any questions, email me or text me. If you need to talk to me on the phone, text me and I'll call you back. That's it. All right. Good luck.